are traveling and they're refused hospitality by a group of Bedouins. So they camp outside the Bedouin camp, and in the middle of the night, one of the Bedouins comes rushing out because the Bedouin chief has been bitten by a snake. And they want to know if the strangers have any magic that will save their chief from certain death. So these companions go and they recite Fatiha and blow the saliva from their mouths from reciting Fatiha onto the snake bite. And the chief miraculously recovers. And he gives them, I believe the number is 100 sheep for saving his life. But there's a dispute amongst the companions as to whether it was appropriate to use the Quran in this way or not. So they decide that they're going to take the 100 sheep and take them to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and ask him if it was okay to use the Fatiha to try to heal this man from a snake bite. So in the narration, it's very clear. They explain the circumstances, and the Prophet ﷺ laughs so much that you could see his back teeth, is the way that the description works. So he's throwing his head back laughing, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he said, who told you that the Fatiha could be used as ruqya? It could be used as an incantation, as magic. And they said, we didn't know. It just seemed like the thing to do. And he said, yes, you've done well. He said, but you have to give me my khums from the sheep. So his point was, yes, the Quran can for sure be used for healing. But since I gave you that Quran and you got them 100 sheep from what I gave you, I need my cut of them sheep. Exactly. I need my 20 sheep. So the reason why I raise it, look, in the Quran itself says, in this Quran there is healing and mercy for the believers. The Quran is healing by itself. The text is in itself capable of agentive action, and it contains within it words of power. That is the traditional Islamic understanding of what the Quran is and what the Quran does. And it's the reason why half of y'all got Ayatul Kursi hanging over some doorway in some part of your house. Can I get a witness? Some of us carry with us. Some of us have Qul Huwallahu Ahad, Qul A'udhu Birabbil Falaq, and we have Falaq wa Nas. I have them next to my office door. Okay? And the reason is that we are expecting God's verbatim speech to act on its own accord because we know it has hidden talismanic properties. Moderns shy away from that kind of stuff because we're about intellect and discourse. The traditional Islamic approach to knowing understood knowledge and power in a holistic, ontological way. Yeah, go ahead, sister. Yeah. Yes. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. That's right. Exactly. Yeah. Yep. I wish I could have been as concise as you were in that description, since I wrote like a 350-page academic book called The Walking Quran, and I really didn't say anything in it except what you just said. So academics, can be long-winded, but yeah, that's the basic idea. It's also, by the way, and we'll just mention this in passing, and then we'll move back to Surah Maryam. It's also the reason that it was only an oral recitation from someone who had received the Quran from the Prophet ﷺ that was thought of as authoritative in the early generations of Islam. A text can never substitute for embodied transmission from person to person. It can never substitute for that. That's also part of what's being modeled in the Hadith of Gabriel when Jibril is sitting knee to knee with the Prophet and they are in physical contact with one another. Physical contact or at least a spiritual version of physical contact, is required for transmission of any authentic knowledge in the tradition. You can't just pick up a book and think that you know something. You have to sit in the presence of someone who has received that knowledge from someone who sat in the presence of someone who received that knowledge, and so forth. In Wolof, you would say, L'Islam kendu ko jangale dañu ko jottali. You don't teach Islam, you transmit it from person to person. So, back to the text itself. Can we have we won't play it, but just to have it on the screen. So it begins with a moment of tawbah, a moment not of repentance of a sin, but of that broader concept of tawbah that we were talking about, that combination of inaba and taslim. When you understand tawbah as being returning an affair to God and then accepting the decree, then the moment of supplication is a quintessential moment of tawbah. The moment when you call out for help from your Lord for some matter that concerns you and you return it to Him, that is a moment of tawbah. It's a moment of inaba and taslim. And the beginning of the surah begins with Sayyidina Zachariah alayhi afdal salatu wassalam engaged in that moment. He is calling out to his Lord. And he's calling out to his Lord in reference to another one of those 7 beautiful traits of character that we mentioned before, ihsan. Being comprised of fear and hope. We talked about this a bit last night, the 2 constituent parts of ihsan being fear and hope. We talked a little bit about it this morning, about balancing fear and hope until the moment of death when we let our hope overtake our fear. So he is poised in that place of ihsan, and you can hear it in the supplication that he makes. He begins by saying, Lord, in calling out to you, I have never been unhappy. You've never disappointed me. I put my hope in you. Hope. وَإِنِّي خِفْتُ الْمَوَالِيَ مِنْ وَرَائِي. But I have fear. I fear for my descendants after me. He's right to fear. The children of Israel have been led astray before, and they're likely to be led astray again, and he is the only prophet that's amongst them at this point in time. And he's an old man whose hair is turning white. His wife is beyond childbearing years. What is going to happen to my people when I'm no longer here to provide guidance for them? Lord, I know this might sound crazy, but I want a child. Why? Because Sayyidina Zachariah alayhi afdal salatu wassalam is connected at this point in time to the namesake of this chapter, Mary, Maryam. He is her caretaker while she is in isolation in the temple. And she has taught him a valuable lesson that he, even as a prophet of God, has forgotten. And that valuable lesson is narrated in, for sure, in part of Ali Imran. And then the story also comes up in a part of Surah Al-Ma'idah. Zachary finds Mary in her chamber, secluded, and she has summer fruits in the winter. So he asks her, where did you get these fruits? And she says, my Lord provides to me bighayri hisab. He can give to me without reckoning. And this triggers a reaction in Sayyidina Zachariah. He's reminded of a thing that we all need reminding of. It's the thing that we're being reminded of with the fire burning the paper exercise, is that there's no limit to what God can do. He can provide fruit out of season for Mary. He can provide fruit out of season for my wife. Her time for bearing fruit may be over, but if God wants to, he can give without reckoning. So let me just ask. Let me ask from a place of hope. Let me ask from a place of fear of what's going to happen if this doesn't come. He's accepted the situation as it is, but he still has hope in his Lord. So he calls upon him. And the answer comes immediately, because the supplication came with hope, and it came with fear, and it came with a genuine need, not just something that you wanted, but it came with a genuine need. So God provides him glad tidings of a boy named John. Why the glad tidings instead of just the thing itself? It happens so many times in the Quran where God first provides the glad tidings and then he brings the thing itself. And it's just also a multiplication and a manifestation of that mercy. You get the good news twice. First, that's right. Yeah. That's right. Tidings of a boy named John. How many of us, first of all, are aware of that relationship that between Zachary and Mary, that Zachary was Mary's caretaker, and that also that Jesus and John are blood relatives, they're cousins to one another, and that the whole of their story actually begins also with the supplication of a woman, because Mary's mother, Hannah, Anne, calls out and dedicates the fruit of her womb to God. But when the child is born, it's a female child, and the Jews did not allow women into the temple. They did not allow women into service, but they made an exception for the fruit of her womb, Mary. And Mary triggered this response in Zachary, causing him to pray for fruit out of season as well, and that brought John. John and Jesus both come from the prayer of a woman. God bless the women. The traditional exegesis of the ayah that comes next is that none had been given the name Yahya previously. We didn't have that Samiyya for anything else. But the other way of translating that particular verse, Samiyya is not just the name of a thing, but the likeness of a thing. And if you translate it as the likeness of a thing, then the verse says, we bring you good tidings of a boy, John, we never made anything like him before. The book of Matthew in the New Testament, I kid you not, book 11, verse 11, 11:11, nothing from the wombs of women is better than John the Baptist. We never made anything like him. The verses are mirrors of one another, the one that comes in the Quran and the one that comes in the book of Matthew. John was special. It was true that God had never made anything like him until he made Jesus. And it was true of Jesus until he made Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. As prophecy is being closed amongst the children of Israel, it's also intensifying amongst the children of Israel. So John comes, and he is blessed the day that he's born, the day that he dies, and the day that he's raised alive. And the exact same formulation is later used to refer to Jesus in this very same chapter. And we'll now listen for a few minutes to the story of the birth of Jesus and to Mary's story. And we're going to do that for a couple of reasons. And we'll discuss those after we listen for just a few moments. You can go back to the 306 mark where it just was, or wherever I, not from the beginning. Yeah, that should be fine. Yeah, just maybe 3 or 4 seconds before that. And turn it up. Perfect.
انتبذت من أهلها مكانا شرقيا فاتخذت من دونهم حجابا فأرسلنا إليها روحنا تمثل لها بشرا سويا قالت إني أعوذ بالرحمن منك إن كنت تقيا قال إنما أنا رسول ربك لأهب لك غلاما زكيا قالت أنى يكون لي غلام ولم يمسسني بشر ولم أك بغيا قال كذلك قال ربك هو علي هين ولنجعله آية للناس ورحمة منا وكان أمرا مقضيا فحملته فانتبذت به مكانا قصيا فأجاءها المخاض إلى جذع النخلة قالت يا ليتني مت قبل هذا وكنت نسيا منسيا فناداها من تحتها ألا تحزني قد جعل ربك تحتك سريا وهزي إليك بجذع النخلة تساقط عليك رطبا جنيا فكلي واشربي وقري عينا فإما ترين من البشر أحدا فقولي إني نذرت للرحمن صوما فلن أكلم اليوم إنسيا فأتت به قومها تحمله قالوا يا مريم لقد جئت شيئا فريا يا أخت هارون ما كان أبوك امرأ سوء وما كانت أمك بغيا فأشارت إليه قالوا كيف نكلم من كان في المهد صبيا قال إني عبد الله آتاني الكتاب وجعلني نبيا وجعلني مباركا أينما كنت وأوصاني بالصلاة والزكاة ما دمت حيا وبرا بوالدتي ولم يجعلني جبارا شقيا والسلام علي يوم ولدت ويوم أموت ويوم أبعث حيا ذلك عيسى ابن مريم قول الحق الذي فيه يمترون.
Go ahead, pause it so that we can resume there. Okay. So Mary is secluded in her space in the temple, facing to the east or in an easterly place. When Jibril appears to her in perfected human form and breathes of the Spirit into her garment, and she conceives Jesus. She begins to wander. A teenage girl, pregnant with no father for the child. fearful and despondent when the pains of labor come upon her. قالت يا ليتني مت قبل هذا وكنت نسيا منسيا. The exegetes of the Quran often point out that this is one of the ayahs that most definitively proves that God is the author of the Quran and not Muhammad. Why? Because no man knows what a woman feels when the pains of labor come upon her. No man is going to think to say, would that I were dead, forgotten, and a thing in oblivion, because we don't know what that's like. God knows what that's like for Mary, and God knows what that's like for every woman that's ever been through it. And for sure, didn't no man write that. So what happens next in the story? A voice calls out from beneath her to comfort her, saying, your Lord has placed a stream beneath your feet. Lean on the trunk of that date tree. Some dates will fall. So eat and drink and qariyayna and have coolness in your eye. You know, be comfortable. It's going to be okay. Who is this that's speaking to her, providing this reassurance? Say again? Allah. Maybe. It could be Jibril. But when Jibril appears to the Prophet ﷺ, does he speak from below? No, when the angel comes bearing the word, the angel, in the first revelation, the Prophet ﷺ specifies that every direction he turned, he saw the angel astride across the horizon. When Gabriel comes, you won't be able to turn away. There won't be directionality of it in that way. It's Jesus. It's Jesus. It's Jesus. He's saying, Mama, it's going to be all right. It's going to be okay. Have something to eat. Have something to drink. Don't be afraid. And if anybody questions you about me, let me do the talking. Make it known to them that you have sworn an oath to the merciful that you will not speak to a soul. So when she comes back to her people bearing this fatherless child, and they say, daughter of Aaron, what have you done? Your people were not adulterers and debauched folk. She points to her child, and their response is, what are we supposed to do? Talk to a child in a manger. And that's when Jesus delivers on his promise. Mama, let me do the talking. قال إني عبد الله يتاني الكتاب وجعلني نبيا. Say, I am a servant of God. He has given me the book and made me a prophet. And he has blessed me everywhere I am for all of my life. And he has given me these traits of character. By the way, every single word in that sequence is an almost exact mirror of the description of his cousin, who was miraculously born a few years before that, the description of John. They're mirrors of one another. And the blessing that God pronounces on John, that he is blessed the day he's born, the day he dies, and the day that he's raised alive, Jesus as a babe in the manger pronounces on himself. Peace be upon me. The day I'm born, the day I die, and the day that I'm raised alive. Jesus was a perfect expression of mercy and compassion. For those of you that know anything about John, in the Bible texts, which don't really represent him particularly well, he was very much more Jalali in his orientation. When the Pharisees came down to be baptized in the River Jordan, he said, "Who told you vipers that I was here?" that balance of beauty and majesty that we talked about in the first session was present in the last two prophets to be brought to the children of Israel. The Christian tradition all but forgot about John the Baptist in raising Jesus' station and claiming what they claimed for him. There are actually still communities in Iraq that practice baptism based on the traditions of John the Baptist. They're called Mandaeans. There's a few of them actually here in California. There's about 60,000 of them in the world, and they have a book that goes back to about the time of the Quran that it contains the teachings of John the Baptist. But in that book, they deny the prophethood of Jesus. The Christians knock down John to raise up Jesus, and the Mandaeans knock down Jesus to raise up John. The basis of understanding interfaith work in the Islamic tradition is that the whole reason why the Quran was sent was to affirm the identity and the truth of every last one of the prophets of God that was sent to the human family. That's also why the Prophet ﷺ kept drawing attention back to his brothers amongst the prophets, never negating them under any circumstances at any time. When someone was critical of Yunus, because he wished destruction on his people, and he lacked patience supposedly, the Prophet ﷺ said, never say that I'm better than Yunus ibn Matta. Don't ever say that I'm better than him. Now, he also said that indeed I am the best of the children of Adam, and that is not a boast. He ﷺ said that, but he said, don't you say that I'm better than Yunus. I am not raised by you knocking down any one of my brothers. Everyone that ever came bearing God's message, and this message from him, is my brother. And I also give you guys Surah Maryam as an object for reflection, because there's always been a minority of scholars who have said that at least Mary was also a prophet. It is a position that has never been a consensus opinion amongst the predominantly male, classically trained scholars. But there's always been a minority opinion that Mary herself held that station. Just as the reference to the revelation that comes to Moses' mother in Surah Taha, when she's inspired, wahi, to place the basket, the boy in the basket on the river will cast him on a bank, so he'll be delivered to an enemy, to him and to me, that I might bestow my love upon him and raise him under my eye, that she too was directly inspired by God and could be considered in that category. The Orthodox Sunni interpretation has always avoided that conclusion, and God knows best who his prophets are. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Because I think, even if Maryam would have explained the situation for like 10 days, it would not have had the impact as one sentence than a baby.
Oh, sure. Yeah, no, the baby speaking from the manger, that's going to get the point across. Although we did start this morning with Abraham having the catapult purpose built to throw him into a fire. So God is for sure not above endangering the lives of his prophets. Indeed, it is a condition of prophethood that you have your life endangered. Sure. Everybody listens. God knows best. The reason why that I mention it is I do think that it's worth mentioning. especially since part of the mandate that we've hoped to discuss through this is how we're able to search within the Islamic tradition to try to redress imbalances within our own community. And we talked about how scholarship has, feminine scholarship specifically, especially in Africa, but also in other places, has been a place for that. And I just want to highlight the significance of the supplications of women in this particular chapter and of Mary's own role within it. I'll say one last thing about that, and then we'll move forward, which is when prophethood ends with the messenger of God, alayhi salatu wassalam, it ushers in a new period in the spiritual history of humanity. There's not going to be any more people bringing new legislation. But it also is a glad tiding, not just bad news. The traditional conception of the specialists in the science of ihsan in Sufism is that the end of the period of nubuwwah is the beginning of the period of wilaya. That for every one of those 124,000 prophets that lived and died, that there are from that point on 124,000 saints who are mirrors of those original prophets. So that at any previous point in history, there may have been one or two or a handful of people with that elevated spiritual station. But that since that time, there's been a mirror for every one of those prophets all over the world. That we are surrounded by spiritually enlightened people who are carrying the characteristics, the saintliness and the goodness that was embodied in those prophets, but they're just not bringing any new legislation. They're still receiving inspiration. They're still bringing along guidance. They're still connected, but they don't make new rules. They have to follow the old ones. And that's really the principal distinction. And the reason why I mention that now specifically is that it is the almost universal opinion that the first supreme saint in the history of Islam is a woman. Any idea who that is? Say again? Rabi Ladawiya, great guess, but not the first supreme saint, because if sainthood begins, Fatima. That she is the first spiritual pole. And when Sheikh Ibrahim Yas, the great West African scholar, was commenting on this, he reminded people that because prophethood is closed, there is now no spiritual rank that is open to a man that is closed to a woman. He was of the opinion that the majority of scholars were that there hadn't been any women prophets, so he didn't count Mary as a prophet. But his point was that now, since prophethood has ended, there is no spiritual station that's open to a man that's close to a woman. Unless and until we cultivate acceptance of that scholarly and spiritual capacity in women. Like I said last night, God will prevent us from having any success in anything we do. He'll forbid it. Yeah? I didn't say that. Don't put words in my mouth. I mentioned those two. I never said they were the only two. Yep. How do you know that some of those weren't women? Of course you don't know that. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And if you look at the translations of the interpretations of commentary, it was amazing to me to discover the differences of opinion among the interpreters. And some of it was radically different from each other. I always loved when Aisha spoke, because I always thought that she was so astute and so balanced in her opinions. I don't think that she was given enough space. In that comment in that book. And there
Of course.
And it's really frustrating when I hear some commentary about the Quran that's so male-centric, so male-centric,
Yeah.
especially around this issue of there were no women, no women prophets. How do we know that? How do we know that? And then say it all the time as if it's conclusive.
People say, sure, go ahead. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. More than that, yeah, go ahead. Quran doesn't say that. The no, the Quran also doesn't say that. So let me. Sure.
It's not like we're stuck in, what I'm trying to say is like I'm hearing or I'm having a reaction to this.
So let me intervene. We're not in the Q&A yet, so I'll reserve the right to redirect the conversation in the following fashion. I don't know that anyone is interpreting the conversation in that way. I'm not saying that you have to believe that there were or that there weren't female prophets. What I'm doing is passing along a piece of factual information, which is that there has always been a minority opinion within the Muslim scholarly tradition that there were female prophets. Moreover, the point that the sister raises is an absolutely crucial one, that there is no, it's the reason why we have to cultivate spaces for scholarly excellence for women in order to redress an imbalance in the interpretive authority that exists within Islam. There are certain ritual roles that are prescribed for men according to Sunni understandings, but there is no scriptural or textual authority for denying pursuit of knowledge or scholarly excellence to women, nor for spiritual excellence. Those are meant to be things that are open and not gendered in that way. And until you have qualified, trained female voices that are capable of interpreting in authentic ways with valid chains of transmission that can serve as a counterbalance to some of the frankly misogynistic interpretations of religion that masquerade as Islam, then we are in a place that fundamentally does gendered violence to women within the religion. And that is something that, as a man, I can't put off onto women to do the work any more than as, okay, so like as a black person, I'm always having to tell white people, like, I don't have a race problem, you have a race problem. You need to fix what's going on in your community so that you can create more space, because I'm grinding over here trying to get this job done and y'all are blocking the way to me. So you need to do work in your community to fix this. Masculine, hyper-masculine interpretive authority is a major problem within the American Muslim community. It's a major problem within contemporary Islam. And male scholars have to try to create space for women. And not just, by the way, in the discussion of women's issues in Islam. But for everything that regards any meaningful understanding of religion. So when I was at Michigan, and I see your hand, but I just want to finish this point because it's really relevant to one of the core topics that we're supposed to be discussing, which is how we implement these ethics today. And this is part of how you implement an ethics of KIST, an ethics of equity, an ethics of balance. In all of the activities that I organize, any panel activities, I always insisted on having a gender balance between men and women in the presenters. And the reason for that, was simple, is it was just meant to provide a fair representation in a venue. But the challenge was that women themselves were always saying, I'm not qualified to do it. I don't want, to do this. And so it took oftentimes specific acts of empowerment to help people inherit that voice. We have to do everything that we can to make this an affirmative action issue, because if we don't make it an affirmative action issue, then the already existing imbalances of power and ideology will continue to reproduce that gendered violence, and more women will get pushed away from the religion into things that are much, much worse. Much worse. Yeah, go ahead.
They're pretty bad now. Women really are, because women are not going to the mosque. And when women don't go to the mosque, their children don't go to the mosque, and their husbands eventually don't go to the mosque.
Yeah.
And so it's already bad. But one of the things that you said, which was interesting, and I know that you didn't mean it in a negative way, is, until there are qualified women to do the interpretation, there are many.
Of course, yeah.
The problem is that they're not accepted as being
Yeah.
qualified, or they have to have certain higher degrees than the men
Oh yeah, you got to clear a much higher bar.
a much higher
Yeah.
bar. And if it steers away from a very patriarchal understanding, you're immediately shut out as being feminist, not appropriate for the mosque, and so
Yeah.
so things remain the same. And this is really, really problematic, because it's destroying Islam, it's destroying American Islam.
Yeah.
When we should be much more dynamic in the way that we relate and understand our religion. And that's what I love about the Study Quran. The Study Quran, I'm so glad you recommended it, because it's a book that really shows, although all of them are men, right, all the commentary, with the exception of Aisha.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah. Okay.
One out of 42
Yeah.
or something.
Oh, you mean the tafsir that appear in it? Oh, sure. Okay.
You can see that there are differences of opinion, and some of the opinions, in my view, are just outrageous.
Yeah.
I don't know how people thought.
Well, and just to return to the broader point, and then I'll call the sister, and then we'll move the conversation in a different direction. We do have to be careful. So part of situating ourselves with respect to traditional Islamic scholarship is that we accept and embrace the chains of transmission for the knowledge that we've received. And we believe that the people that have transmitted that knowledge to us were righteous, believing people who practice what they preached. Exactly. But that does not make them infallible. Respect for your teachers and for the fact that you received your knowledge from them does not give them a status that we don't even attribute to prophets. Prophets receive guidance and correction from God. They're infallible in every major way and in the ways of conveying the message, but every human being makes errors and makes mistakes. So that the veneration of scholarly authority and the veneration of chains of scholarly authority should never become an excuse for us to not exercise our analytical functions. It should never become an excuse to automatically endorse the social norms that adhered in past periods without asking whether they actually conform to what Islam as a religion and an ethical system demands from us, or whether they are simply the reflection of the patriarchal or racial or ethnic circumstances in a particular time. We have to respect those chains of transmission, but we shouldn't imagine as though every last one of these people were incapable of making mistakes. And we have to have the audacity to disagree sometimes with the people from whom we received our knowledge when we have sound, well-rooted reasons to do so that are based in Quran and Sunnah. I saw hands over here too. Oh, yeah, sorry, you were first by a long shot. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I actually think, today we have to acknowledge that probably the majority of Muslims, they're non-Arabic speaking.
Oh, by a wide margin. It's not close.
So
Yeah.
most of us are reading it through translations. And if historically you look at it, and if I'm wrong, please correct me, but from what I
No,
That they were one of the first groups that they did the translation. So my point is that there's a lot of biasness
Yeah.
that has entered into the translations. And you pick up any of the translations, for example, in English, there must be copies from one to another.
it's true, yeah.
My approach, because I started reading them and I see a lot of the different translations, they're almost carbon copy of each other. But when you go to the root of the language and the words exactly, you realize that the translations are not accurate as they should be, of what it was meant. So I think it becomes more of a responsibility of each one of us to read the actual Quran. And right now there are a lot of tools that they are available online or even on your phone that you can actually look at the meaning of those words in more sort of like in depth. And I think we have to take an active role to enhance these translations because definitely they're biased from a perspective of a male versus the correct view. I think male have become very biased in the translations.
So the one thing, I'll just say one thing, and then we'll move the conversation in a slightly different direction. The translation of the Quran began immediately. It's not something that waited. You shouldn't feel shy about using translations of Quran. You should read them carefully. I just want to, this is an important historical point because there's a lot of people that feel as though the translation of the Quran is in and of itself, problematic. And yes, it's good to have access to the original Arabic, but early legal authorities, including Imam Abu Hanifa and others, not only did they encourage the translation of the Quran into Persian in the very early days of Islam, but ritual salat was made in congregational prayer using Persian translations of the Quran. Persian was used for ritual prayer. In place of Arabic, the original Arabic text amongst Ajami people who didn't understand the Arabic language. Say again. I don't know from documented historical sources whether that's the case for Turkish or not, but there's an amazing book called The Vernacular Quran by a scholar called Travis Zadeh, where he actually goes into the primary historical documents and shows that within 20 or 30 years of Islam coming into Persia, the Farsi is being used for ritual prayer. Yeah, of course. Of course. So, but the point is sorry, the point is not special Iranian claims making. It's I can think of a few reasons. The point is that for those of us who are Ajam, for those of us who are non-Arab, go easy on yourselves a little bit. Don't stress yourself out in that way. In the early days of Islam, it was not at all unusual for the ritual power to continue to inhere in the Arabic language, but for all kinds of other purposes, for vernacular languages to be used. And even in West Africa, where Arabic has been mastered for 1,000 years and people have taught Arabic grammar and taught all of the Islamic religious sciences, people still use the vernacular language as the primary language of explanation of the Quran. And the reason for that is simple, is that if you want to follow in the footsteps of the messengers, and the messengers all came conveying the message in the language and culture of the people, then what language you got to use to speak it? You got to use the language of these people. And how are you going to develop the terminology that will communicate complex Quranic concepts into a vernacular language unless you are actually doing so? And it is actually a problem in the American Muslim community. It's something that I try to avoid when I do discussions like this. But you'll go to talks where Sheikh, so-and-so will use, one Arabic word for every 4 words in English. And that they'll just assume that the people in the audience are following along with the Arabic terminology, even though most of the people in the audience are not, Arabic speakers. And that we don't actually take the time to unpack those core Islamic concepts in a language that people understand. Whereas in most traditional societies that are not Arabic speaking, they have developed highly specialized technical language in their vernacular language that allows them to communicate Quranic concepts clearly. Part of our problem is that we have not done that work with the English language. It was the reason why I spent the time in defining taqwa by relating it to the English concept of awe so that we can try to get closer to a native understanding in our own linguistic frame of reference for what that concept was in its original language. And that, by the way, is the task of translation. The great scholar, really extraordinarily interesting scholar, Walter Benjamin, talked about the act of translation as not being a simple correspondence from word to word, but rather the way that you produce the effect in the receiving language that was produced in the original language. And that means that you have to draw on the resources of the receiving language in order to produce something that's akin to the register of meaning that comes from the original. But different languages produce their meanings in different ways. Arabic produces it on the basis of roots that are derived in almost mathematical form to express certain kinds of meanings. English doesn't work that way. It's much more eclectic, and it draws on a different set of allusions, allusions. So in order to communicate ideas that come from the Quran, you have to first master English, not Arabic. You have to master how the system of references and allusions works in the English language to be able to draw out those meanings that come from Arabic and then to communicate them in an effective fashion in the English language. And I'll just say a point from another extraordinary scholar, a Senegalese scholar. His name is Moussa Ka. Moussa Ka was a follower of Sheikh Ahmadou Bamba, who I mentioned earlier a few times. We have the image of him praying on the waves. Bamba was somebody who only wrote in classical Arabic. He wrote more than 200 distinct works that scholars have been able to classify, and he only wrote them in classical Arabic. Some of those works are collections of as many as 200 distinct poems, and some of those poems are as many as 5,000 lines in length. Do you want me to do the math for you real quick? The brother wrote a lot. His followers like to say he wrote 7 tons of scholarship. Almost everything that he wrote in the second half of his life was madih, poetry praising the Prophet, alayhi afdal salatu wassalam. Nothing but praise poetry for most of those works, and all in classical Arabic. So, but this man who only wrote in classical Arabic commanded his followers, who were masters of the Wolof language, to write their praise poetry in Wolof. So Moussa Ka once wrote a beautiful poem praising the Prophet, alayhi afdal salatu wassalam, in the Wolof language, and he prefaced it with the following preface. He said, "Some of you will say that I shouldn't use a profane language like Wolof for the expression of such lofty things as praising the Messenger of God." He said, "But I say whether I write this poem in the language of the Holy Quran, in the Wolof language, or any other language, it's the same. Any language that you use to praise the Messenger of God will find therein its innermost value." Have we done the work with the English language that the scholars in other parts of the world have done with their languages? Have we mined our own English repertory to find the very best words that we can to praise the Messenger of God? Have we done the rigorous linguistic and semantic work to communicate those Quranic ideas effectively? Because the fact of the matter is that if we are to be tools for spreading this light, it ain't going to be Arabic that's going to spread it to this broader society, is it? If we restrict ourselves to the use of Arabic language and Arabic terminology, we will be preaching to the choir and to no one else. it's also the reason why we're focused in this gathering on ethics and not on debates. The people in the broader society to whom we hope to bring some of the light that we have been blessed to receive are not going to be impressed with the pedigree of scholars that we list for them. They're not going to be expressed or impressed with our linguistic facility with Arabic. They will be impressed if we embody these traits of character. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Perhaps yes, perhaps no. And then there's, lots of shades of answers in between. I mean, I think of somebody like Amir Suleiman, for example. An extraordinarily gifted, rapper and poet who I just saw on my Instagram, during the break, has a program on spirituality. I think he entitled it Between Rakim and Rumi, right? That uses, kind of a combination of hip hop, vernacular, and Sufi terminology to help bring spiritual realities into the language of this place. I'll tell you how it happened for me. One of the pieces that appears in Jihad of the Pen, the book that I assigned as a reading that I'd like you guys to consider looking at after we finish with the course. So I translated some of Masalikul Janan, Ahmadu Bamba's treatise on Sufism, Pathways of Paradise, and we'll teach from that and Surah Yusuf tomorrow. And I'll close, by the way, by getting us headed towards tomorrow's lessons in just a minute. But I also translated one of Ahmadu Bamba's poems praising the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But since he, in this particular poem, says that the goal of the poem is to bring joy to the messenger of God with these rhymes in every age and every hour for all eternity, I translated the poem in verse. Now, there's a reason why I was able to translate the poem in verse, and it was because I never wanted to be anything except for either a rapper or a baseball player when I was a kid. So I had memorized, rhyming dictionaries, but I actually had to put into practice this exercise of trying to find the words that would produce the effect in the English language that were produced by this glorious poem in the Arabic language where Bamba is praising the messenger. So when Bamba says, وهو النفيس فلا تقيس وهو رئيس للأنبياء شمس الشموس رأس الرؤوس خير الأنيس للأولياء شفا صدوري ضياء دوري بدر البدور بديدياء. It becomes in English, and I'll just pick up there and extend it. A priceless treasure, precious beyond all measure, prince is he among the prophets, son of sons, prince of princes, to the saints an ally and dearest of intimates, healer of hearts, the glow of the hearths, the fullest of moons shining luminously, divine rain for the grateful, but lion to the hateful or the unfaithful and cowardly. Garden of the guided, fire of the misled, his eminence clear to those who reflect, eraser of error, bearer of gifts, for creation a guide without defect. He gained his glory on the midnight journey, not in fantasy but in the flesh. Glory to the Lord, whose beloved drew near by night in innocence at his behest. Once purified, he made the journey, bringing joy to the prophetic assembly. The trustworthy traveled with trusted guide on trusty steed to peaks of purity. Surah al-Amini, مع الأمين فوق الأمين للأصفياء. This isn't just a conversation about translation. It's not just a conversation about finding the right language to reach the society around us. This is a conversation about tapping into a well of spirit-nourishing beauty and finding a way to bring it into being in this place. And the truth of the matter is that the reason why we focus not just on Quran, but on Sirah, on the character of the Messenger of God, is that he is the secret to that. His beauty of character, his spiritual station, his goodness, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Trying to come to terms with that question that I wrote earlier today, those three questions. Who is God? What is the Quran? But especially that last one, who is Muhammad? If we are able to undertake an effort to bring real answers, historical answers, ethical answers, spiritual answers, poetic answers to that question into this broader society, we won't have anything to worry about. Teach people who Muhammad really is. And the truth is that only God knows who he really is. So exhaust all of your words, exhaust all of your efforts, exhaust all of your research in exploring not just his sirah, but in exploring the depths and limits of love for him. Because love for him is the thing that's going to produce the result. Love for him is what's going to set you on fire with this religion so that you can become an agent for going out and spreading it. This religion is comprised of three loves. It's comprised of love for God, it's comprised of love for the messenger, and it's comprised of love for humanity. The love for humanity, because he, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, said, you will not enter the garden until you've believed, and you will not have believed until you've loved one another. All of the tension, enmity, claims making, position defense is irrelevant in the face of the very reason for which God created all of humanity in the first place, and that's love. Cultivate that, and the smaller debates will start to disappear. You'll become an agent for spreading that love, for spreading that mercy, for spreading that compassion. That's the end of the hadith. Shall I tell you a thing that if you did it, you would love one another? Spread peace. By the one who holds my soul in his hands, you will not spread peace until you are merciful. O messenger of God, we are merciful. It is not mercy amongst yourselves. It is mercy in general. It is mercy in general. It is mercy in general. It's not mercy with the people that are in your community. It's not mercy with the people that are in your ethnic community, in your gender community. Not mercy with people who share your opinion, not people who share your sect, not people who share your tariqah. It's mercy in general to everyone at every possible time. Would you like a preview of where we're headed tomorrow and for the principal obstacles for cultivating that mercy? Okay. Say again? Oh, you can Google it? Yeah, okay, good. Of each letter? Check Google. He's at it again. When I looked for the numerological values a few months ago, I could only find the Eastern ordering of them, whereas the Maghribi one is the one that's always used in West Africa. So maybe they have the Eastern. It only changes on like the last four letters. They differ in their numeration. The Western one is the older one. Okay. So. And now I went at the board and can't write on it. Yeah, it's okay. Who would have thought that I could be so easily defeated by a whiteboard? Yeah. So, each of those 7 character traits, we focus today just on tawbah and its opposite, kibr or istikbar. Each of the 7 traits of character has a negative trait which corresponds to it. And again, we did not pay the khatib $50 to actually literally list the 7 traits of character today during the khutbah. That was just fortuitous act of providence. He also made the point, which I made last night, which is that God never says that he hates something in the Quran. He says he doesn't love. So he loves these beautiful traits of character, and he does not love these ugly traits of character, because like we established, God don't like ugly. Avoiding those traits of character is partially accomplished by identifying them. But every person that sets out on a road of ethical purification, seeking to eliminate those characteristics and cultivate positive ones, is on a journey in which they're going to encounter obstacles. Those, they're going to find enemies that are laying in wait for them along the road. In the Pathways of Paradise, Masalik al-Janan, a text written by Ahmadu Bamba, he identifies those 4 principal enemies. And these are the same 4 principal enemies that are identified by Imam Ghazali when he talks about the enemies of spiritual progress. Hawa, I'll get there. What Ahmadu Bamba does, which is something that I had never heard of in any of the teachings of other religious scholars, if you'd heard of anybody doing this, then let me know, is that he reduced those 4 principal enemies to a single mnemonic device by taking the first letter from each word, na, sha, ha, du, and turning it into a word, which is nashahadu. We bear witness. We bear witness that the 4 principal enemies of spiritual progress are the nafs, the shaitan, the hawa, and the dunya. So in a single word, it captured a whole teaching of the obstacles that you're going to encounter, the enemies that you're going to have to face on the road of ethical purification. The first of them is the nafs. Your own soul or self or ego. The term means all of these things. And just as a side note, the kind of principal components of the human being. Right too. So the 4 kind of principal parts of the human being that the Quran talks explicitly about are the nafs, your soul or self, the qalb, your heart, or sometimes as sadr or sudur or fuad, the ruh, that divine breath that was breathed into the frame of Adam, and then in various forms, the physical form of a human being, either in reference to the limbs collectively, in reference to the body, or in reference to specific limbs. But that physical body, the spirit, the heart, and the soul or the self are the kind of principal components of the human being that are mentioned in the Quran. Those are the pieces that make up the essence of a human being. The thing that you think of as you, or the thing that is you, is comprised of all 4 of those pieces. You are this body, you are that divine breath, you are that soul, and you are that heart. But the nafs tends to try to predominate over those other pieces. It's that thing that you tend to self-identify with, is that lower soul, that ego. That thing in its unreformed state, when it's in its unreformed state, is something that is an obstacle that needs to be overcome. The first mention of it comes in the next surah that we'll talk about, which is Surah Yusuf. The mention of the nafs that comes there is in the moment after the wife of the minister of granaries, who had been the adoptive mother of Joseph, finally, confesses to her efforts to seduce him. She says, indeed, the nafs is amaratun bisu, that it's enjoining towards evil except for the one upon whom the Lord has mercy. Without God's mercy, your soul, yourself, is going to be enjoining you to commit evil. That's the state of the nafs in its unreformed position. The nafs is the thing inside you that you actually most of the time think of as you. It's constantly chattering, telling you what it wants. Feed me, give me something to drink. That person's physically attractive. That thing, the thing that's constantly chattering and asking you to fulfill some kind of need for it. The parable of the nafs in the Quran amongst the specialists of tasawwuf is often Pharaoh. Pharaoh is the one that says, I'm your Lord God Most High, worship none but me. And that is the role of the nafs within the human being. It's constantly providing you with a command that it wants you to fulfill. But that command doesn't have to do with honoring your spirit. It doesn't have to do with honoring your heart. It doesn't even necessarily have to do with honoring your body, because a lot of times those appetites that the nafs calls you to will literally destroy you. They'll break down your body. It's this constant source of appetites, and it can never be extinguished. In one understanding of it, this one is the one framed by Imam Farid Rami. He points out that the nafs is made from flame. It's made from fire. So just as fire, the more that you feed it, the more that it grows. It just comes to consume everything. And if you give it what it wants, it only increases. If you give into it, it only grows stronger. And then he likens it to the hellfire, which the hellfire is going to keep getting people. Hal min yazid, is there still more? Give me more. The more you feed it with people, the more people it's going to want. It's not going to be until, thank you, the foot of Al-Jabbar, until God himself stamps the hellfire closed, that it will be able to accept the end of its feeding. And that's how the nafs functions. Your appetites will continue to call to you, and the more that you feed them, the more that flame grows. The problem posed by the nafs is that it's not just your soul and your ego and your appetite, but it literally means yourself. So I'll ask you a rhetorical question. If yourself, if your nafs is the instrument that's broken, how can you use a broken instrument to repair itself? Most of what passes as ethical exhortation in contemporary culture is self-help. But if the self is the thing that's broken, how do you use the broken self to repair the self? There's a saying, it's an East African saying, even the sharpest knife can't carve its own handle. If you are the instrument that's broken, how can you repair yourself? The fact of the matter is that the intervention that takes place to reform the nafs always has to come from the outside. Some other person has to intervene in your life to help you get out of the prison of your own nafs. Everybody needs a teacher. Everyone needs a guide. Because the thing that human beings are most practiced in is self-deception. You will convince yourself that your aims are noble, whereas you're really just justifying the decrees of your nafs. And Pharaoh, that tyrant inside you, is commanding you. So the, yeah.
There are also very deceptive teachers and guides out there.
Oh, we'll get there. We'll get there. Yes. But the point is that even the most debauched degenerate would be a better guide for you than you. Even the most debauched degenerate would be a better guide for you than you. Which is the reason why the people of Tasawwuf often would say that the person that has no sheikh, shaitan is their sheikh. It's also the reason, I'll put it in these terms, we'll go to the sunnah for it just to make it easier. One of the things that the Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said is that one of the best things that a human being can have is a friend that will tell them the truth about themselves. And if you have no such friend, then go sit with your enemies, because at least they'll be honest with you about your character. We deceive ourselves as a matter of course, and we come in to maturity and adulthood having done all kinds of harm to ourselves that takes us out of our fitrah and puts our nafs in charge, and we're fundamentally broken. You're going to need someone else to guide you out of that. You're not going to be able to do it yourself. You need to find someone who's actually already been set free from their prison to set you free from yours. The whole each one teach one thing. But you're not going to be able to get there yourself. And it's difficult. When I teach this in university settings, when I teach Sufism, the white kids love it. They love all the mysticism. They even love the numerology, the stuff in the magic, the stuff that everybody else thinks is weird. The white kids are big into it. Yeah, exactly. They think of it as like some kind of Muslim Buddhism, New Age stuff, and they think it's very cool. Until we get to the part of you have to have a sheikh. And then they're like, nope. And I'm gonna tell you the explanation that was given to me as to why you need that guide. It was when I first went to Senegal in 1996 as a very young man, and I was in a similar position, thinking, I'm not going to trust people with my spiritual well-being. I was also coming off of a big Salafi kick, so definitely the idea of having like a sheikh was just a dumb idea across the board. And so I maybe been in Senegal for like two weeks, and I'm buying a pair of bootleg Air Jordans from a street vendor in downtown Dakar, right? And he's got a picture of Ahmadou Bamba on a necklace around his neck. And I think that this is like the shirkiest thing that I've ever seen, like, why you got this man's picture around your neck, and then I start giving him the whole, Salafi trip. Well, every believer has equal access to God. You should approach the Quranic text yourself. Why do you have to depend on what somebody else's interpretation is, the whole nine. And he says, yeah, I hear this kind of thing a lot from, Westerners, especially, Americans. And he said, I guess it's that whole all men are created equal thing. He said, which is a great thing to say, and it's a good way to arrange your government, but we all know it's not true. He said, take these Air Jordans, which were not Air Jordans, some Chinese knockoff of some Air Jordans. But he said, take these Air Jordans. He said, no matter, he said, you play basketball, right? I was like, yeah, I play some pickup basketball. He said, good. He said, no matter how much you practice basketball, you'll never be as good at basketball as Michael Jordan. I said, that's true. He said, you're a student? I said, yeah, I'm a student. He said, let's say you're a student studying physics. No matter how hard you study physics, are you going to be as good at physics as Albert Einstein? And I was like, nah, definitely not. He said, okay. He said, well, the reason for that is that some people are given more innate talent for basketball than other people. Some people are given more innate talent for athletics. Some people are given more innate talent for physics because some people are given more innate talent for intellectual activities. He said, and some people are given more innate talent for spirituality than other people. The people that were given the most innate talent for spirituality, we call them prophets. The ones that came after that, we call them saints. And this one that you see around my neck, he was in that second group. So when I'm trying to get somewhere, I'm following behind him. The fact of the matter is that by accepting Islam as a religion, you have already accepted the notion that some people are spiritually better than other people. that God creates and that he chooses, and he gives certain people knowledge that he doesn't give to others. It's actually what comes next in Surah Maryam when Abraham first takes the message to his father. He says, God has given me a knowledge which he has not given to you. Follow me and I'll put you on a level path. But the pride of that man refuses to allow him to submit to Abraham. Just like my pride refused to allow me to submit to the teachings of a teacher, just like the pride of most of us refuses to allow us to submit, yeah. Not on camera, but we can discuss it, at some greater length. Let me maybe just finish the first point, and you table the question until we come to the end and we do Q&A. The point is just that if we understand that some people are more spiritually accomplished than other people, why wouldn't you follow somebody who's good at this? Somebody who it comes easy to them, and so therefore they've been able to go very far with it. Whereas it might not come as easy to you, and you haven't been able to get as far with it, but with their help you might get a little further because they know the way. And the truth of the matter is that we accept this in every domain of our lives, except apparently spirituality. We always value expertise and experience. We don't say when something goes wrong with the plumbing in our house that I'm smart and capable and I'm going to go in there and figure it out myself. We find somebody who's good at plumbing and who has done a lot of fixes in a lot of different homes so that they can diagnose it right away and they can turn it around because we know that they're good at what they do. The experts, the spiritual experts, are often called, their discipline is called Tibbul Qulub, the medicine for the hearts. These are heart doctors. These are people who have been doing this for a while. They've reached a certain spiritual station and they're able to help other people because they've seen a lot of different cases, some that are similar to one another, others that are dissimilar to one another. And it's easy for them to see where you are, and it's very, very hard for you to see where you are because you're too busy being trapped inside it. Every single human being that has a functioning heart takes spiritual benefit from more than one human being. Okay? I'm not necessarily advocating for any specific arrangement of spiritual mentoring or guidance. There are multiple configurations of that can occur in any one human life or in different people's human lives. But the one thing that I know for sure is that you are not getting out of prison by yourself. Somebody is going to have to help you out of that jail. The prison of the nafs is really tricky. You'll think you're out, but if you're relying on your own devices, you realize it's just an elaborate ruse to keep you from ever getting out. To keep you from ever getting out. That's exactly, the nafs it's created this perfect prison. Somebody else is going to have to help you out. So you're going to need another person. You're going to need a guide. You're going to need a mentor. And the Prophet ﷺ was even modeling this in the hadith of Gabriel. He was showing you the adab that you have to have with somebody that gives you life-saving, sacred, precious knowledge. It's the reason why when he quizzes him, he answers like a school child. And why Umar is like, who was this guy to think that he's going to confirm the answers that are given by the messenger of God? He was modeling the adab that you're supposed to have with somebody who is giving you spiritual guidance and helping you get closer to your Lord. Yeah. I'm sorry to frustrate you. Oh, I didn't say you could find these people in America. Did anybody hear me say that? I didn't say you couldn't, but I didn't say you could. I never said that you couldn't access God without a guide. So, but here's the This very same issue comes up in the Quran itself. When Muhammad ﷺ is bringing the message, the Quran says, would they rather that an angel brought it down or that a book descended from the sky? What people want is that they want to be able to bypass dependence on other human beings in order to get close to God, but it's God's sunnah that he makes people rely on people. He is the one that chose human beings as messengers so that people would have to pass through other people to get closer to him. And he's the one that cast that inheritance from those messengers along chains of other people. There's this very simple reason for it, is that it's also part of expressing that love for humanity, because in allowing people to guide other people to him, he increases the blessing for both the guide and the guided. He multiplies the blessing so that everyone that's in the relationship benefits from it. Yes, of course, there are dangers within it. In Kashf al-Albas, the amazing book by Sheikh Ibrahim Yas, he describes all of the pitfalls that come with finding an inadequate teacher. And he describes all of the criteria that a consummate sheikh should have. And then he ends the exposition by saying, you will probably wonder where you ever might find such a person. He said, surely they must be more rare than the anqa. Anqa is like a griffin or a phoenix, like a mythical bird. But he said, the truth of the matter is you don't need to know where you're going to find your sheikh. As soon as you need a sheikh, the way that a person that's dying of thirst in the desert needs water, as soon as you need a sheikh, the way that a person that has lost their child in the desert needs to find that child, your sheikh will appear for you. As soon as you are serious about getting out of where you are, then God will provide it, because he's always the one that he provides. It's him burning the paper in the beginning. It's him sending the individual. It's him sending the person. Even the people that you find along the way that give you difficulty or turn out to not be what they appear to be are part of the lesson that you need to acquire on the way to getting out of your prison. It's a test for your persistence, and it's a test for your ability to withstand just a different kind of trial. I'm not advocating that people submit themselves to spiritual abuse. That's a real thing. That's a real thing. No one is ever going to say that it's not. But the point is nobody is more spiritually abusive to you than your nafs. Nobody. Nobody. Yeah.
So I think it's just being open to accepting lessons from other people and the teachings that you can find.
So we talked about earlier that there's only one doer, and it isn't you. The truth is that all of the lessons come from God, period. The ones that taste good and the ones that taste bitter. The ones that are encountered, from a person who is ostensibly there to provide spiritual guidance, and the one that comes from the stranger that you encounter in the street. The poem that I was just reciting a moment ago begins with the line, Hamdali Rabbi Khairi Murabbi. Praise to the Lord, the best of spiritual trainers. God is always providing tarbiyah to people. The question is whether they're going to take it. But the fact of the matter is that this sacred knowledge, he has made it passed down in these chains of transmission from person to person. So find somebody who's got that light and sit with them, because you can get that light while you're still alive, but once we're gone, you can't get any more light. And none of us knows when we're going to die. And it's urgent. It really is. And it is daunting. It is challenging. I'm not going to suggest that it's not, especially in America. Because the spiritual sicknesses of the American Muslim community are many. It doesn't change the fact that the nafs will just continue to play games with you. The reason why the order is in this way is that you don't even really actually, the shaitan does not have to expend precious resources on you when you're still trapped in the prison of your nafs and before you have guidance to get out. Because as long as you have not begun the jihad of nafs in a serious way, you're your own shaitan. He doesn't really have to. So the shaitan's resources are limited. He can't apply force in every place at every time. So he has to be selective. So as long as you're still in the prison of your own nafs, then he doesn't really have to use much on you. Just a little whisper will do. You'll take care of the rest for yourself. Does that sound about right? Yeah. 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 I think we can all agree we ain't talking about them. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Sure. Sure. Yeah. 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 Right, for sure. Secure your own mask before assisting others. People that haven't escaped from their own prison have no business trying to get anybody else out of theirs. Sure. Listen, I can't tell you what's going to apply for you in your time. I can only tell you that the established methodology and the cosmological roots for it in Islam do suggest that human beings are chosen to provide that guidance for other human beings, and that light is passed down through chains of human authority, and that as long as we are in that unreformed state, that nafs is going to continue to keep us from evolving to the next stage. And I'll have to leave it at that for now, but we can pick back up on this tomorrow when we get further into Surah Yusuf. I want to just introduce the shaitan because that's the next step in the progression. Is that a bad choice of words? Everybody knows him already. Well, the one thing that I'll say about this particular enemy is also comes from Masalik al-Janan. What Ahmad Ubamba says, he says, never forget that the shaitan is only a dog that's set upon you by a master. When you get attacked by a dog, only a fool yells at the dog. The wise person calls out for help from the master. When Iblis refused to bow to Adam, was God surprised? No. When he didn't ask for forgiveness and instead defended his position, was God surprised? Which means that Iblis is serving the cosmological function for which God designed him in the first place. The shaitan isn't doing anything except for what God destined for him to do. The good of it and the ill of it all comes from God. The fact of the matter is that the shaitan is only a dog at the end of a leash. That's what dhikr is for. When you call out using those names, the idea is that God is going to pull that chain and he's going to choke that dog and get that dog off of you. The only reason why he made that dog is so that you would call on him, so that you would recognize your dependence, not think of yourself as self-sufficient, and ask him for help against this dog. And here we are just yelling at the dog. Shaitan this, shaitan that. Call out for help from the master. That's, by the way, the other part of this teaching scheme. It's not enough to provide a diagnosis. You also have to provide the remedy. For the attack from the nafs, because the nafs is rooted in the appetites, because it's like the fire, the way that you treat an attack from the nafs is that you starve it with fasting. You deprive it of its fuel. And therefore, when the nafs hits you, you're able to get it to subside. We all feel it during Ramadan every year, right? As soon as we start fasting, that barking dog inside of us that's constantly, he just becomes too tired to keep asking for stuff, like, he's not going to give it to me anyway. So the fasting starts to create that effect of just tamping down those appetites and the effect that they have on you. So you treat the attack from the nafs with fasting, you treat the attack from the shaitan with dhikr, with remembrance of God, with calling out with those names. And I'll say more about that tomorrow when we actually get into Surah Yusuf, but we'll just do a quick gloss of them now and then we'll finish up. The third one is the hawa, the passions or caprice, desire, whim. All of these are contained in the Arabic term. I would think maybe caprice and passion do the best in communicating the idea. This is less about the appetites and more about the emotions. If I had to make a distinction between an attack from the nafs and an attack from the hawa, that the one is about appetites and the other is about emotions. And that is, that also inheres in a hadith. The Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said, if a person with iman guarantees me 2 parts of the body, I'll guarantee them paradise. And they said, what are the 2 parts? And he said, the part between the teeth and the part between the thighs. The treatment for an attack from the passions is fasting of speech and also fasting of marital relations, with your spouse's consent, obviously. That the fast from speech is one of the principal elements used by spiritual trainers to help control excessive emotionality and being carried away by caprice. And we saw 2 fasts from speech in Surah Maryam. 2 fasts from speech. The 3-day fast from speech for Zachariah when the sign comes at the birth of John, and the 1-day fast from speech for Mary when Jesus says, don't worry about it, Mama, I got this, to paraphrase Jesus. Those are 2 conventional fasts from speech that are often prescribed to help remedy this particular spiritual illness. Try for 1 day not speaking. And I don't mean just not speaking. Stay off your Instagram, stay off of Facebook, cut off communication with the world. Use your tongue only for remembrance of God and for prayer. Use it only for dhikr and salawat. And you'll realize immediately how much you abuse your tongue. You realize immediately how much you abuse your tongue. And you'll also realize the effect that it has on your emotional states more broadly. Because when have you ever been carried away with excessive emotion except that it was your mouth that carried you there? How many arguments became heated? How many things that couldn't be unsaid got said that then pushed a person to an ever heightened state of emotional disturbance? How much damage is done in those states when things that never should have been said get said and then they can't be unsaid? The tongue is an incredibly powerful instrument, extraordinarily dangerous. It's not for nothing that the Prophet said, I will guarantee paradise to a person that has any iman and can protect these two organs. That's all it will take. And it's not as easy as it it's not as easy as it sounds. Should we just wrap up with one or two questions? I know we worked in a lot of questions along the way, and I know it's late. We had an extra hour for the prayer, and I know y'all might be tired. I ain't tired yet, but y'all might be. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. 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 وَتَوَكُّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ وَكَفَى بِاللَّهِ وَكِيلًا. As it comes back multiple places in the Quran. We put our reliance on Allah, and we put our trust in Allah, and He suffices us as a trustee. The challenge is relatively simple. People think that the plan that they have for their own life is better than the plan that God has for them.